Well, so we have some rule. I can't remember what Annie calls it, but it's basically if it appears to be we're going to get hit with nukes, we're supposed to fire nukes back, which strikes me as an insane policy. And people have talked about it. Apparently, this has been hotly debated, saying this is an insane policy. Now, the reason you have it in place is because you need the people who could fire the nuke to think, okay, we might hit them and destroy them, but we are going to end up destroyed too. You need them to believe that. So it's possible we don't really have that rule, but we have done everything we can to convey we have that
rule. Hey guys, welcome back to Capital Cosm. I'm Danny, and today we have Dave Collum making his return on the show. Dave, thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, we were just chatting it up right before we hit record, and we were like, I think you said it to yourself, like, let's just hit record. Like 15 minutes just going at it. Like, really interesting content here. Let's just dive right into it, Dave. What is front and center for you in terms of the markets, the economy, even politics, if you want anything? What's top of mind? What's occupying your headspace right now?
Well, the obviously the elections are the elections look like sort of moral decay of the American experiment to me. So it's not so much about who's going to win and who's going to lose, but the question of whether or not we are on some downslope. It's not necessarily terminal, but a protracted one.
Right.
I also worry about world peace. I know it sounds like a Miss America answer, or
save the whales.
Yeah, save the whales and world peace. But not only do we have conflicts that look sketchy, like in Ukraine, which I think is dying down, so that one's getting safer, I think. But if NATO decides to amp it up, then it becomes very unsafe very quickly. But also Israel and Gaza, which I avoid like the plague in terms of passing judgment on one side or the other, in part because I'm too ignorant. I think I kind of understand Ukraine. I worked very hard to understand it. I don't think there's any amount of homework I could do to understand Israel, Gaza. Fundamental question I keep asking is, how do you even know it's a fact? And so here I will go out on a limb on Israel, Gaza. I don't think we know what happened on October 7th. I think the factual foundations of October 7th are not knowable. And part of it's just because I know that sovereign states will fly their ass off to tee up whatever it is geopolitical movement they're going to do. So this is not a specific criticism of Israel, but rather just to say that Israel will do what every other country has done when they wanted to go to war, and that is tee it up. I do think the Israel-Palestine conflict has much greater destructive potential. And so I worry about that. I think the markets are due from massively bearish period that in the worst case scenario is more about duration than price. I don't think we're looking at a big, sort of swan dive that then we dust ourselves off and start a new bull market. I actually think the age of those V bounces is at some point will come to an end. I think it's come to an end, but if not this time, then at some point it has to, because you don't just keep V bouncing, and you do if the V bounce is off unbelievably low valuations, but they haven't been off unbelievably low valuations for 40 years. So we've been recovering artificially. I think the mega companies of the present pale in comparison to the mega companies of the past. I think these companies don't look like great wealth creators to me at this point. The ones that did create wealth, like Apple, when was the last Apple product?
Yeah, and there's only a relatively small number of them compared to days past.
You got the Mag 7, but the Mag 7 is does not look that good to me. I can't even remember who's in the Mag 7 at this point, just because they seem to come and go. But I'm a super bear on NVIDIA. You can make a case that NVIDIA is going to do a loosened technology like Swan Dive at some point. I think, I like to cite that, Microsoft has had a phenomenal run. So people on Microsoft have done really well. But in the last 10-ish years, a factor of 4 of that is valuation expansion. Valuations, what follows a valuation expansion is a valuation correction always. Always. There's never been an asset that got overvalued that didn't eventually find its way to undervalued. And so if a 75% drop takes you back to 2013, 14 valuations, seems like a foregone conclusion that'll happen. Now there'll be some maybe growth in the business and stuff, but that's a headwind. So, I have my 40-year bear market theory, and I can tell in some sense I'm close because I read the comment section and I lay it out, and I think I lay it out in 4th grade arithmetic. I think it's an easy case to make. But I watch the comments, and it's a bunch of fist pumpers all saying, this guy's been bearish for 3 years now, and therefore, and I go, it's a 40-year call, dude. Your 3 years of being wrong are pale in comparison to my 40 years of. And I do think it's 4th grade math that says that if we regress to the mean, and if the GDP grows at a fairly normal rate, and if you accept the notion that we're 150% overvalued, which you're going to have to, most people are going to have to do a little homework to get to that, but I think it's true. Case-Shiller index shows that, I think. But there's many others. Then if you sort of grow your way out of that, and you don't necessarily just grow your way out, you drop, you grow, the price drops, the economy keeps sort of chugging along. But I think 40 years from now, the price of the S&P, if it's regressed to the mean 40 years from now, and if the economy's done okay, we will have treaded water.
Lots of stuff to unpack there, Dave. I want to talk about your comment there about the V-bounds or the lack thereof that might be coming our way that we've gotten accustomed to. One thing to note is that the Fed seems to have lost its magic. They cut rates by 50 basis points, but yet the 10-year keeps spiking up. So it seems like they've lost a lot of that magic. What do you make of that? Why do you think that is? Why do you think the 10-year is rising in defiance with the Fed funds rate?
Reminds me of a few other moments in my recollection of market history. Going down memory lane a little bit. When I was a gold bull, with great fear because they were rare and they were wrong. But I remember, I think it was around 2001, the brown bottom, it's called, where, every time gold started to get some legs, and getting legs was rising from, 280 to 300. It was really not much legs, but every time we got legs, the Bank of England would announce sales and the gold would get its ass kicked. And then if it started to rise again, the Bank of England would actually sell some and it would get its ass kicked. And then one day, I was actually mentioned this on a podcast, the Corlin Economic Report. And the Bank of England, the gold started to get some legs. And the Bank of England reported that they were going to sell some, and gold went up and not down. And I go, wait a minute, what was that? The universe just flickered. And then it kept going up, and the Bank of England sold some, and it still went up. And so I was on the Corlin report, and I said, something has changed. And I was probably still like at 320 or something. I mean, it was way down there. Related situations are like when the yuan had been pegged to the dollar. And all of a sudden, one day, for about 10 minutes, it flickered. And then it went back to looking pegged. And someone said, some people said, what was that? What just happened there, right? And I think they were sort of testing the machinery, right? I think they were saying, okay, let's unpeg it for a minute or two here just to see what happens. And maybe the 10-year is now giving us one of those little flickers, one of those. You ever see the three body problem? It's a TV series which they've only made the first third.
No, tell us about it.
It's this interesting And they've only made a third of it. And I found it so interesting. It's where the physics of the universe all of a sudden goes a little haywire. And all of a sudden the stars start sort of blinking a little bit. And they call it the universe winking at us.
What exactly is it though?
It turns out it's some distant galaxy, high intelligence group, maybe interdimensional sort of shit. But since I'm only through, there's a trilogy, which if you read it, the people who've read that, no, I don't know. But it was entertaining. It was sort of riveting as the first season played out. And it feels like the universe winked at us. They call it the universe winking. That feels maybe like the bond market's winking at us. And maybe what it's saying is, look, for 40 years now, you guys have had the luxury of the Fed monotonically sort of ratcheting rates down, and they'd ratchet them down, and then they'd pump them up a little bit, and then they'd ratchet them down, pump them up a little bit. And if you look at a plot, it looks very orchestrated, right? You almost get the feeling that someone said, look, based on the rates right now, we can squeeze about 40 years worth of real gradual rate reductions out of the system. So this is going to work really well. Well, the bulls often cite something Buffett supposedly said, and they bastardize it, and they say the Fed that low rates is bullish. And their argument is that, well, if rates are low, then stocks are more competitive, and so they can attain higher PEs. But that's not quite right. What's right is that dropping rates are bullish, so that the equities can go up to capture that arbitrage. Once the rates are low, you're done. We got to zero, right? We got to negative in parts of the world. And so one can make the argument that we hit the bottom of the barrel.
Could we ever go negative in the United States like they did in Europe?
I think we could have, but I think things would have started breaking. I'm not sure. It's an emergent system, so you can predict all you want. You know, you collapse of the yen carry trade and things like that. But then, but you know, Edward Chancellor, who really is brilliant, wrote a book pretty recently. It's called The Price of Time, which I like because to me, time is a more important variable than price. And for example, in the Nikkei, it's not the price of the Nikkei not moving; it's the fact that it has moved for 35 years. That's the story. It's not that the U.S. markets corrected 70%, inflation corrected from 67 to 81. It's the fact that it took 14 years. And you go, well, you know, 14 years isn't huge. Well, it's crudely speaking, a third of your investing life. So if you said to a boomer today, by the way, you're not going to be able to avoid this, but over the next 14 years, you're going to lose 70%. The boomer would go, well, okay, now I'm 66 years old. I'll be 80 years old by then, and I'll be 70% poorer. They're not ready for it. And so it's the 14 years that kills you. And that's why I think the V bounces are over, because I think it's about time we get one of those duration problems. And Paul Singer's been talking about duration. I believe he's making the same argument I am, although his language is a little cryptic to me. Yeah, I think we're going to go through a period where we're going to either go up and down but go nowhere for a very long time, or we're going to go down and then we're going to get up and we think that the V bounce has arrived and it's not, and it has not. And we're going to go down again, like, you know, in the 30s, what it dropped 90%. So, you know, you buy the dip and then you go, oops, that didn't work. And then you buy the next dip and you go, oops, that didn't work. And pretty soon you say, I can't buy any more dips. I got no money left.
People were made of a different substance back then in the 30s than they are today. Do you think they're going to be able to withstand what's to come?
We don't have a choice, right? You have to withstand it. That's like saying you're going to death and taxes, right? You got to withstand those two as well. So no, we don't have a choice. It's like, can you withstand not eating as much? Well, yeah, there's no food. That's what you do. So yeah, they can withstand it. There's going to be adjustments involved. And you know, what's our debt growing at 7% a year now? Is that number what you recall?
Possibly. Yeah. I haven't checked in a while.
Yeah, I know, because it's big, and it's not
It's
going
just
to change that
arbitrarily
much.
large.
Right, but 7% a year is not, if your economy is growing, 2%, 2.5% a year, and your debt's going to 7%. It doesn't take a
Mhm.
genius to spot the math problem there. And credit card debts are soaring, and the so-called private debt market, which most people don't know much about, and those of us who know it exists probably don't understand it, um, is supposedly huge and totally unregulated. And someone like Melody Wright, who you ought to interview if you haven't, um, she can talk about it, I think, a little more intelligently. Um, and um, and I can help you connect up with her if you want.
What's her name? Melody,
Um,
right?
Melody Wright, Wright.
Who is she?
She's this real estate person
Hmm.
who has this very mild mannered delivery, almost Girl Scout like or something. But then if she actually gets someone on there who thinks they know what they're talking, if she gets interviewed by someone who thinks they know what they're talking about, she can beat them sort of bruised around the face pretty fast with the facts when she has to. So she's very smart. She knows a lot. And the private debt market, and this may be a grotesque oversimplification, but for example, if you go to buy $1,000 bed, and they say you can pay it off over the next 2 years, or you can pay it off 2 years from now, or whatever. It's a way of basically putting it on your credit card without picking up a 27% interest rate, and so that turns out to be a fairly unregulated market. And I believe what happens is that the mattress store sells that debt into the private debt market, and so they basically carry the debt, and the private debt market funds it. And there's probably other variants. It's probably way, way, way more complicated than that, but I'm still playing catch up. But it's since it's unregulated, it's very hard to estimate, but it's supposedly in the multi-trillions. And so what happens? We have an economic downturn, and you have $1,000 bed. Are you going to keep paying those bills, or are you going to pay your car installments? Right? And the answer is you're
Yep.
going to bail on the bed and pay the car installments, or pay your grocery bills, or whatever. And so that market could be the first to go. That could be super subprime, and 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 the commercial real estate market is tanking. And I think you can make an argument that in the digital world, it's conceivable it's never coming back in its old form. And never is a long time, but
The real estate
it's,
market, that is?
yeah, the commercial real estate market, and the knock-on effects are huge. So if all of a sudden you don't need as much high-rise office space in a big city, you also don't need as many bodegas. You don't need as many shops. You don't need, right? All the consequences that are a direct result of having millions of people flooding into the city every day. That number, if that tapers off. Now, I think companies are getting tired of remote workers, because I think remote workers are taking vacations. I'm not sure. I don't work as well at home. I know that. I would not be a good remote worker. And I think others work better at home. So it's very dependent. But if we do go digital, and you're never going to fly 20 important people into Manhattan and put them around a table on the top of some high rise and have them talk about topics. You're going to do with Zoom. You're going to Zoom that sucker.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you fly across the Atlantic to go to some meeting for 2 hours?
I mean, I can tell you as a YouTuber, I mean, it's much more economic for me just to talk to you guys on Zoom as opposed to flying you out here and doing all the
Right.
logistics and spending money. Like some of these other YouTubers who they do like interviews in person. And in most cases, it's either on the guest's dime or on the host's dime. But I just get more value out of just talking to you guys on a rapid fire fashion. I can knock out 5 interviews a week, and
you can be sitting there in your boxers and no one knows, right?
I am. No, I'm not.
I actually did a podcast with, I'm trying to remember who it was. And he got up and walked away from the screen for a minute. He was in his boxers. And I said, you didn't have to get dressed up for me. So I think there's fundamental changes in society. I think the other thing is I think the age of the V bounce is over because the inflation has dug into the DNA like a vaccine, and so now I think that the inflation will respond hypersensitively to changes that used to be ignored. And there's quotes from central bankers who say, since the populace doesn't know there's any inflation, there can't be any inflation. I go, well, there's some truth in that. And then there's an absurdity to the implicit, therefore there won't be inflation.
Right.
But now I think people are responding to the inflation and rates are everything's cranking up hard. No, if you were going to sign a 5-year contract now, what kind of inflation hedge would you build into the contract if you were a labor union? It would be pretty impressive, is my guess.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, inflation is partly psychological, but it's not the only component, right?
But that's the expectation part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you about your experience with some of the younger demographics. You are a professor or reaching the tail end of that career. What do you see by way of the Gen Zers, and do you have any alpha generation kids in your classroom, Dave?
What's alpha? I don't know. Right now I'm teaching grad students, so they'd be 22 years old, maybe 22 years old.
Yeah, most of my audience is fairly old. So, I mean, you seem to have boots on the ground insight in terms of the younger demographics. How do you see them prepared for what's to come? Do they have a chance?
Well, it's been my thesis that every generation of youngster has found a way to just appall their parents. And so when I was a kid, if you wore your hat backwards, you were a moron. And then we raised kids who all of a sudden decided wearing their hat backwards was the way to go, So, and our parents got tattoos during World War II. So boomers, none of them got tattoos when they were young. That was it. You would never get a tattoo. And then after that, kids came along and started getting tattoos all over their body. So, but what I would say is that the boomers were hard to shock because they were the most shocking of generations. That, you get a World War II generation, new family, and all of a sudden you find your teenage kids are doing drugs and have the pill. And we went from Annette Funicello and Bobby Darin to the Doors and acid rock and stuff. And I think that was shocking to our parents. I think they were really not ready for it at all. My kids did not shock. I would say that the boomers were absolutely ready for anything that could be delivered to them or appeared to be so. But then the modern generation has regained their foothold on shocking their parents. And so now you have all the transgender stuff going on. And right now, I've been reading about transgender for a couple of years, anecdotally. So just little puzzle pieces, just piecing together. I try not to read overviews if I can help it, because I want to assemble my own narrative. I don't want to just reiterate someone's narrative. But I'm now reading Abigail Schreier's book. I can't even remember the title, but it's about gender transition, and it's worse than I thought. In that I knew it was pervasive, but what happens is the gender industrial complex, their entire reason to be is to get these kids to transition. And so, and it includes the American Medical Association. It includes way too many people who ought to know better.
Is it for money or is it for other reasons?
I don't know. It could actually be sort of a fourth turning thing where there's this mind virus that's taken over society and really just...
Yeah, it's happened before in history when societies reach a certain point of decadence and I guess prosperity, like the Roman Empire. They started dabbling with gender as well.
Yeah. So the recurring theme that Schreier hits, which I had not completely understood the magnitude of the problem, is that the transition community, their entire focus is on separating the kids from their family.
Mm.
And so there's these, thought leaders and stuff, just like on Twitter, just like but they're saying, if your parents don't support your transition, they don't love you, but we are your friends. And there's all this clustering. So it's a social contagion, clearly.
Right.
That's not to say there aren't legitimate cases, but I think they're relatively few and far between. And now the system is set up such that your kid can get transitioned without your permission. The psych community seems to have all accepted. It's kind of like the climate change narrative, where the entire world has accepted this narrative. And this one, I don't quite understand why it's so easy to accept.
Well,
because you think
the psychological community or the psychiatry community, whatever you want to call it, they work on a consensus basis. So it's
I guess so. I wouldn't have known that, but I guess so.
It's not like the physical sciences where you actually have to demonstrate a hypothesis, experiment, and then confirm.
We are consensus basis too, if we're not careful.
But they're more so.
Yeah. Ours is just where we agree that something's true and someone forgot to notice that no one actually did the experiment rigorously.
Theirs is less confirmatory. Theirs is because the soft sciences are less discernible. They're more
squishy. They're squishy.
Yeah.
Like economics. So in any event, so the world seems pretty weird to me, and it's hard to picture the next 10 years being that smooth based on all those parameters that I just told you. And I'm too old to be fertilizing the tree of liberty and shit like that. So even my wife is starting to get the heebie-jeebies and has encouraged me to buy more guns and things like that, which is not usually what your wife encourages you to do.
What about gold? Did she tell you to buy more gold?
I've assured her we have a ton of gold. So I've assured her that if the zombie apocalypse shows up in the financial markets, if we're toast, boy, everyone's toast. There's only so much you can hedge against, right?
You're going to have bigger things to worry about. It's like the argument I hear against Bitcoin. I'm not like a Bitcoin bull, first and foremost, just an FYI. But you hear the argument, well, what happens when the power goes out? And it's like, when the power goes out, you're going to have issues and worry about your Bitcoin wallet.
You're dead. Yeah, you're dead within a couple of weeks. So yeah, that is the absolute weakest argument of them all, right? I do still feel some pain for the guy who had his computer taken to the dump, and it's now an estimated $500 million worth of Bitcoins. And he's suing the city because he wants to excavate the dump. And what I don't understand, maybe you can explain this to me. Wouldn't you save your codes, for want of a better word, redundantly? You wouldn't put them on one hard drive.
Yeah, that's what I would think, especially if you had that much.
Well, the hard drives die. I don't know. Never having really gotten into the guts of what it takes on a Bitcoin. And if I'm going to go Bitcoin, I'm going to have my own codes, right? I'm not going to let Larry Fink hold them. How's that?
You're just asking for trouble then.
Well, you might as well just buy NVIDIA, right?
What do you think is behind that, by the way? Why is Larry Fink and BlackRock? Why are they getting into crypto and Bitcoin?
There's money to be made right now. They'll abandon it as soon as they're getting out of DEI now, right? They got in, they got out. They're just they are marauders. Why did the Vikings attack northern England? Because there was gold there. There were monasteries there they could pillage, and as soon as there was nothing left to pillage, then they went elsewhere.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, You could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys.
So,
do you think that the transgender stuff eventually has peaked as well in the same way that wokeism peaked around, let's call it 2022? DI has peaked. It appears that America has seen a rightward shift in the last couple of years. I mean, I think that'd be fair to say. The Republicans have a +1 lead in party registrations for the first time in like decades, like 20 or 30 years. Like they've never had this lead. So could we apply the same principle on the transgenderism? Do we think that it should be waning down a little bit?
Well, the silly thing about that is that I think people knew what was logical. I hesitate to say right and wrong, but I did a poll at the end of last year and said, no waffling, no ifs, ands, or buts. Should biological men be able to compete in women's sports? Right? That's just said yes or no. I gave no exit channel for people who wanted to waffle. I got 97.6% no. So society's already decided that thing's stupid. What they haven't figured out is how to get there. And the problem is each individual does not want to withstand the pressure of defying for example, I think the pinnacle may have been the Olympic boxing. I think woman beating as an Olympic sport is probably going to turn out to be the low watermark for that. And Riley Gaines gets tons of credit. I was going to write about it last year, ran out of gas. I wish I had, because now it's just going to be kind of matter of fact. There's enough people out there. But what appalls me is that, we battle like crazy as a society for women to have equal opportunity in sports, meaning that, if women wanted to compete in lacrosse, make sure you support the lacrosse team, right? And then all of a sudden we let guys into the sports after all of that. And so here's what appalls me is that I understand why there's people who have a lot to lose who don't want to speak up. I once asked a 3-time Olympic medalist, female, about the gender in sports issue. And I watched her tighten up, and she was heading for the next Olympics. I watched her tighten up, and she very methodically answered the question. And I can't remember the answer, because what I was struck by was that maybe it wasn't fair to ask her, because if she gave me a straight answer and somehow it got leaked out, she could be booted off her team. So just asking her to respond to that question put her over a barrel. Now, there are plenty of women who did do sports, who don't have a lot at stake, who should be screaming at the top of their lungs. And they're not yet. Now, I just noticed the 5th volleyball team has taken a forfeit against a transgender containing volleyball team, and I think it's San Jose State. So you're sensing a momentum shift where now all of a sudden it's no longer sort of a life-threatening thing to take a stand. And I'm sympathetic to that, right? I just watched a video this morning where a guy was teaching. It was from a movie, I think, where a guy was teaching a bunch of law students, and he kicked a girl out of the class arbitrarily and capriciously. He said, "Get out of the class. I don't want you here. Don't come back." And then after she left, shocked, he starts talking about it, and he says, "What's really noticeable is none of you spoke up. I just applied a totally unjust rule to that woman, and you didn't say anything. You all sat there. I could see you were uncomfortable, but you didn't say anything." And the message really is you got to say something. You got to speak up, and you can't not, if you're I do understand people who are in positions where if they speak up, they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their livelihood, their families aren't going to be able to pay the bills. I get that. But there are people who all they're going to lose is friends, maybe. They should be speaking up. If your friend can't take it, if say I'm, going to vote for Donald Trump and I lose friends. They weren't friends. So I'll just form new alliances with people who are not so narrow-minded. If I gave up on people because they voted for Biden or Harris, I'd have no friends. I mean, I'm surrounded by,
especially in Cornell,
anywhere from sort of, what's even odd? I have 30 colleagues. I might be able to identify one or two who are actually right of center. I'm not sure because they're kind of, I'm guessing there could be more in hiding. But let's assume that, 28 out of 30 are left of center. I can assure you when we hire, we're not sorting for political leanings. If we were, I'd be screaming. I'd notice it very quickly. And we don't. We literally scour the earth trying to find the person who we think is the best candidate. And we don't care how many other schools are going to offer this person a job. We will offer that person a job. And somehow we end up with a 28-2 political leaning. And I don't know what that is. And maybe it's the nature of academia, but when you run a chemistry program, you eat what you kill. If you don't raise the money, you don't have a group, you don't succeed, you don't get tenure, you're running a small business. You earn kudos amongst your colleagues for being a big swinging dick who publishes important papers and who raises money and runs a group. And so there's nothing left wing about it except for the fact we apply to the feds for money, although that's not even 100% true either. We can apply to pharma and things like that. And so it's not our world does not look left wing. If our students are not living up to our pretty high standards, they get asked to leave.
Yeah.
It's so.
And whatever the case may be, whatever the reason may be behind the huge skew of left-leaning professors might be, they are churning out the future elites in these universities. So it is the origin point of where these elites that go on to run the media, that go on to run the government, they all come from the university system, which is very left of center, to put it mildly.
But they're very left of center as soon as you step away from the hard sciences. The hard sciences are left of center. They're pretty lopsided, but you get outside the hard sciences and it's you wouldn't even call it lopsided.
But it's really academia where the elite become leftists or cultural Marxists.
Well, I would say that in some sense is not even true, in that if you look at the kids in my grad course, for example, from 0 to 22, the indoctrination of these kids started in daycare. By the time we get them, they are one tiny little nudge away from Marxism. They've already been told that you get to be however you identify. They've already been told that it's simply not, meritocracy is already been undermined at some level, right? So they understand getting A's versus B's, things like that.
But do you think if there was a conservative skew that they could be turned around in the sense that they're still impressionable enough to be pushed in any direction?
I think so, because I think reality pushes you conservative, right? As soon as someone tries to take your money to give it to someone else. Yeah. So we had a student here who was openly gay, and that's not rare. There was something about this kid that I found endearing. He wore it well. I mean, he was flamboyantly openly gay, but there was something about him that made him kind of a hero figure to me. The way he did it. And then one day I ran into him in the strangest of experiences. My son's, as I said, a musician. And I go to Boston to hear him play in a concerto for a fundraiser in some brownstone, rich, very gay community. And I'm sitting in there, and this student of ours walks in. And I'm thinking, oh, how weird is that Josh would just walk in? What are the odds of that? right? But then I realized for Josh, he's going to this thing that's, the cultural elite of Boston, and he walks in and I'm sitting there. Right? And that's really more of a mind blower. So when we were talking, I said, my son's joined your team, Josh. He was all excited. I said, yeah. It turns out I talked to him about it. I thought my son was gay, and but when he hadn't come out yet. But he said, well, you're gonna love this. He says, I'm now conservative, right? So as soon as someone tries to take your hard-earned wealth from you to give to someone who is you perceive to be less deserving, reality really kicks in.
Have you seen that statistic where it looks at unmarried men, married men, unmarried women, and married women along with their political dispositions? And the takeaway of that chart was that pretty much men, unmarried men, and married women tend to skew conservative. It's only the unmarried women that are carrying the load for the rest of the Democratic Party, let's say. They tend to skew liberal to a massive degree, so much so that they can kind of make up for the losses on the other group. But it's interesting that once you between the differences between the married women and the unmarried women, women that are married tend to be more conservative than women that are unmarried. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, because women crave security. And so when they're married, there's a greater sense of security involved, by having a family, a husband, etc. Whereas if you're unmarried, you've really got nothing. You look towards the state as a woman for protection.
Right. I have a student who's really unattached, a male, and he occasionally hits Tinder, whatever. And he said it's overwhelmingly occupied by seriously left-wing women. And I sort of asked why, and he gave a Darwinian answer. He said, well, down deep, when you're in your 20s and you're dating, you might not know it, but you're looking for a mate. You might think you're just looking to get laid or whatever. You might think you're just looking to have fun, but your biochemistry is looking for a mate. And the conservative female is way more of a mate than the liberal female. The traditional values are raise your kids, make sure they're number one, that sort of thing, non-self-centered. And so I think Tinder gets scrubbed clean of right-wing women very quickly. And so you'll go on Twitter or something and you'll see some chick who you would pay to carry her groceries for her, right? And she might be 35 years old and she says there's just no available men. And I'm going, well, you're probably a douchebag, right? You're probably a piece of shit to date. And because it's certainly not your looks that's keeping you out of this game. And then there was another one that was funnier than shit. She said, I date men, and she says, I can't find any who are remotely masculine.
Oh yeah.
Who aren't right wingers.
I remember that. That was in the DNC or something.
I guess. I don't know, but it struck me as holy shit. Are you not getting the message? Right? Well, women have an interesting problem. So they really, again, I'm speaking biologically. I'm not speaking completely in the modern cultural sense as much as just evolution, which I was a genetics major and I like evolution. But women have a razor's edge where they biologically are trying to find a provider, protector, who therefore has to be big, strong, tough, durable, who won't hurt them. That's a balancing act. And so they have to be civilizable. Great. I love maxims and aphorisms. And one of them I saw the other, not too long ago, said men marry women hoping they'll never change, and women marry men hoping they will.
Oh, yeah. Because that's like a fantasy. That's like a fantasy of women.
That's a fantasy in both cases.
Yeah, it's that they marry some some ruffian and then they domesticate them because it's so then they can say, oh, this is my beast. I've been able to tame the beast.
Right.
But they also,
the way I used to say it is men fix cars, women fix men.
Yeah. Because women want a guy that can be aggressive and take charge whenever he chooses to, but he chooses not to. It's kind of like having a sword but choosing to sheath it, right? As opposed to a man that's kind of like a domesticated rabbit. They're not nice because they choose to be. They're just nice by their nature because they have no other They have no other form of expression.
My wife and I are polar opposites in some sense, but there's the common denominator that makes a marriage work is really very basal, right? It's not whether you both enjoy hiking, right? It's not. Or it's something really
same favorite songs or like all that stuff doesn't matter. Like favorite
That's
shows.
Right. There's some deep-seated sort of moral foundation issue that you agree upon. And I really do think it's that. I think you have to recognize your partner as morally your peer. And but my wife, she was kind of finishing school type, very proper. She'd been proposed to 13 times, I think. So she waited till she ran into a impoverished professor. Yeah. And actually the other 13, I think 12 of them were wealthy. She was at one point engaged to a Rockefeller.
Really? Like a legit John D.
Well,
Rockefeller
how many generations out, but the guy didn't have a job. How's that? But that didn't work for her at all because that's not a provider.
She chose you over a Rockefeller?
It does seem a little weird, doesn't it? And she wanted me to say derriere, not but, and I'd go, Candace, it is a fucking but. It's just stupid. And I'm the guy who uses the F-bombs like writers use a space bar, right? So just every other word fills in the gap, and she's proper, and somehow the two of us cohabitate, and it works fine. And I would say I've won. I've made her tolerate me, and I haven't curbed that much. And I know what can push her buttons once in a while. This guy named Laban on Twitter, and occasionally talks about things he does with his wife, and it's really funny. One time he said, I don't even know if he's making this shit up and just coming up with jokes or what, but he says he stole his wife's phone and texted her sister and said, "You have a fat ass." Only a guy would do that. Yeah. Right. That's because
guys are risk takers. Guys tend to be more risk takers than
we look for bar fights and women don't.
Mm-hmm. That's why when you look at the IQ distribution of men and women, women actually have a higher IQ on average, but they're all clustered in the center.
Whereas in the middle. Men, the men have fat tails.
Yeah, you have fatter tails. So you have a lot of the idiots that just jump off a roof with in a flaming table in a backyard wrestling match. And then you have the geniuses on the other end.
Well, I used to describe YouTube as young men, drunk chicks, and morbidly obese guys in their backyard. all of YouTube seemed to be just videos made by those three categories of people. It's like the upper tier cable channels used to be sharks, pyramids, and Nazis. They're very predictable.
Back in the good old days.
Yeah, YouTube sucks now. YouTube is mediocre now compared to what it used to be, in my opinion.
And Rumble, Rumble's nice and everything, but it's just too politicized. It's just a political platform. It's not like I could
live with that. It seems to not. If I do a podcast that goes on YouTube, the click count is very different than on Rumble too.
Yeah. But the thing is with Rumble, it's yes, you do have more voices on Rumble, but it's you can't find stuff you can't find how to fix your car on Rumble. The cool thing about YouTube, pre 2016 or 2017, was that you had everything on. It was like a one-stop shop. You could talk about anything, right? Whether it's controversial or not, it was all there.
Yeah.
Whereas now with Rumble and some of these other platforms, you just go there for your political fix that you can't get on YouTube.
Right. But YouTube used to also be where I could go there and it would offer me stuff, and it was brilliant. And now I must admit that watching bunch of young babes do the shake dance isn't unpleasant, but it's not really why I go to YouTube, right?
Yeah.
I could get sucked in watching some chicks doing some dance in their hot pants, but it's not the high watermark of YouTube. And I find the choice it gives me are not very good compared to what it used to be. And it could be that so it's not reading my mind as well as it used to, in my opinion.
They probably they've had to parameterize it quite a bit to make sure that the some of the content that they don't want to get out doesn't get out.
Yeah. And I don't know why some things go viral. So for example, I've done podcasts with Anthony Pompliano, right? And he has a pretty big following. And the click count can vary by an order of magnitude, right? We can go all the way down to, 5,000 and all the way up to 250,000. And I can't figure out a correlation.
Yeah. Well, you may have said something that may have limited your reach on one of these videos. You may have said the NAZI word that can limit your reach on YouTube. A bunch of other things that limit your reach. You just don't know.
Right. And it's some algorithm picked up on it and said, okay, shut that guy down. I've also, I read comments because there is content in there, but it's bizarre. So you and I are having a conversation, right? This is a normal, it's probably 60-40 me babbling and you trying to reel me in. But I've seen podcasters who are really hands off and they just sort of come in about 10% of the time and just let you babble. And then in the comments, someone will say that the host should learn to shut up and let the speaker speak. And I go, what are you watching? Right? I mean, this is just, and I'll do podcasts where there'll be, flattering things and they seem sincere. And then all of a sudden, like 4 in a row, there'll be this moron doesn't know what he's talking about sort of comments. And I go, what's
I've
that
seen that
about?
before, yeah, on my channels. I get it both ways. Some people comment and say that I let people talk and they like that. And some people say like, oh, you need to, shut that.
But I could imagine you, because of the fact that we do this highly interactively, I can imagine that going both ways. But I've done ones where the person doesn't say boo, and they still get criticized for interjecting too much. And I go, what? I would say the best podcasters, my experience, the best podcasters are the ones who put me a bit on a leash because of and sort of oh, Dave, pull on the chain, get them back to get them back on track, that sort of thing. And
yeah, well, I'm going to take you a little behind the curtain, you and the audience as well. Typically, the reason why they do that is because they just get more minutes out of you talking without them having to interfere. So typically, what we do is we have a list of questions ready at the helm before the interview,
right?
And the more you talk, the more I still have more ammo in the chamber, right?
Right.
But if I just go through all these questions, and all of a sudden I've got to think of stuff on the fly. So it becomes more of a challenge. So
well, you must have the occasional guest who does the monosyllabic answer, and you go, God, can't you carry this?
Yeah. I've had plenty of those where it's just like
those must
be
a
minute
awful.
answer, and then I've got to think of something on the fly because we just run through the questions in 10 minutes.
Right. And so there's all sorts of happy mediums, all of which work. The other thing I've noticed lately, and I'm doing too many of these. Dinah West, I did a 3-way with her with Mike Ferris and Dinah West. She's an author of several books. She said something really interesting. She used to be on Lou Dobbs all the time. And she said, you can't think and write deeply about a subject while at the same time, several times a week, having to respond to current events in real time. So to stay up with the current events, to be able to go on Lou Dobbs and to be able to talk about it consumes your day. And she was trying to write a book. So she got kicked off Lou Dobbs for saying something someone didn't like. And then that bought her the time to finish her book, that sort of thing. And I've realized that there's some truth in that where where you can spend all your time trying to keep up with today's news, and you don't end up doing anything of necessarily of great consequence beyond that. And it's I've noticed that that's an issue for me. I'm trying to think it through. And there's always today's news, right? I mean, there's not a day goes by where there isn't something that all of a sudden some guy comes out and says, okay, I'm going to tell you all the ways that, Tim Waltz molested me in high school. And all of a sudden you go, I can't totally ignore that, right?
Is that going to be an October surprise, do you think?
Well, if it's already been surprised, it's not enough ammo to do anything. So there's some emails and stuff that you don't know if they're true. There's a guy who spoke anonymously. He says he's going to come out and speak non-anonymously.
It kind of reminds, what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Hunter Biden in 2020.
Well, except Hunter's problems were real. Waltz's may or may not be real. I have no trouble.
But back then we still didn't know. But back then it was still kind of like up in the air as well.
Well, I thought Hunter Biden's laptop was real from day one. I had no doubt because, for one thing, you can prove a laptop is in possession trivially by saying, okay, let me tell you this. On April 28th, 2020, he got an email from so-and-so. Go ask him. Right? Yeah. Go have him check. You can cross-check it, and they go, oh, you apparently do have his laptop. And I was pretty sure that was at New York Post. They weren't going to go forward with a laptop without doing some cross-checking. So the fact that they pretended like the laptop was fake struck me as a lie right from the very first day. I didn't for a second doubt the reality of the laptop. The origin story as to how it came into the possession of the computer guy and stuff, that was up in the air. I couldn't tell if Hunter really abandoned it and the guy really was just a computer guy or someone somehow got a hold of it. That was far less clear to me, but I was sure they had it. We still don't. I mean, there's a 500-page report written on Hunter's laptop with pictures and stuff, and it requires way too much patience to go through. I tried some keyword searching to see if I could find some stuff. Rumors that there's, the evidence of pedophilia in there. I've seen pictures of Hunter with a bunch of children. So, and I'm kind of interested in that question. But the fact that the president's son is a crackhead in itself is not a story. If he was cutting deals with the Chinese, that is in itself a story, whether he's a crackhead or not. So if Timmy Waltz, T. Diddy molested kids in high school, that's a game changer. As long as that story really,
legalistically within the democratic rules, or like
no, I think it's too late to push them out. I think it would push people away from the polls. I'm not convinced we have any idea what's going on in the election. Trump could be ahead by a mile. I don't trust any of the polls.
Well, you see it in the betting odds. I don't know if you keep track of some of the.
You can even modify that though. What kind of quantity of money is being bet?
No, but what I'm saying is Trump actually started pulling up ahead. So he has a
no, I got that. But the point being is I don't think it's enough money where someone who wanted to alter that outcome couldn't just dump a lot of money. And now here's what's great about it. So let's say you decide
you see it uniformly across all of these betting odd markets. It's not just one.
Is it uniform? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's a uniform move. So someone knows, someone's pricing in a Trump win. And so if you look at the biggest betting market out there, which is Poly Market, they're pricing at a 58% chance of a Trump win. Now,
that's not a big chance because a narrow margin could be a 98% chance, right?
Yeah, but Trump is usually way below. Trump is usually the underdog in these things. In 2020 as well as 2016, he was. I mean, he had he was given like a 20% chance or so.
Yeah, so this is the best lead he's had at this point, right? Yeah. The Waltz, the Democrats deserve to lose, in my opinion. This is not about their policies or anything like that. They have, in my opinion, abandoned their voting base. in such profound ways by shoving Biden in there when he really was not even close to. How many people in the country were more qualified than Biden for that job in 2020? It has to be in the millions, right? Any CEO of any company would be more qualified than the demented, pathological, lying.
But it's a feature, not a bug, right? It's a feature.
I know it is.
Yeah, they wanted a cutout to just.
But
I can't remember who it was.
But the average Democratic voter should see that so transparently and say, "Look, I'm disgusted by this."
Well,
and then they wedge in.
Trump. They were voting against Trump, not for Biden. That's
but that should not be adequate. I mean, I really think that as a Democrat, you should be truly appalled. You know, like when Hillary looked like she's being anointed at one point, and then Obama took over. That was the party working, right? The party figured out that Obama was a better candidate, and so that was the Democratic Party doing what it should be doing.
And they made that decision at Bilderberg. Remember that?
The what?
They made that decision at Bilderberg. It was during the Bilderberg meeting.
They did. I don't remember that. Remember that.
They had both been attendees at Bilderberg, and then a day after the meeting, Hillary came out, conceded. Obama became the nominee.
Sort of like when Biden took it in 2020, where all the Democratic candidates all on the same day stepped down, right? Same sort of thing. Well, I can even live with that if the party is saying, look, if the power structure is saying, look, this is our best shot. But then they wedge in Kamala, and I think she's terrible. Forget about whether maybe she could win. I think she's terrible, and I think sacrificing a respectable candidate for leadership just to win is just it's kind of an abomination to me. And
you think Biden hates her? Do you think Biden is working against her?
I would be pissed off at her, but he's so demented. I think at this point, I think he's got Jill Biden probably hates her, right?
Trump alluded to it.
Well, he'll allude to a lot of stuff. The $1 million question, let's say Trump wins. The $1 million question is, will we see a new and improved Trump? Because he's now, in 2016 to 2020, he was simultaneously fighting wars on every front, which were impressively deep state wars, and trying to get reelected. He no longer has the reelection issue. He now knows where the spoons and forks are. I think he must know people he can now he knows people he can trust, I think. And so he could build an inner circle of impressive characters, I think, who are trustworthy.
I think one of the biggest differences between 2016 Trump and today's Trump is that 2016 Trump was largely small he's funded by small donations. If you fast forward to today, I think it's like 70% large donations that he's funded by now. So he's had to make some concessions with, some. Well,
it's also true though. In 16,
guys.
they didn't think he could win. So why would you dump money into him, right? So he was a sideshow in 2016 until he won. So I don't think the big money felt any need to do it. Now, it's also possible, one of the biggest liars in terms of making promises and not living up to them was FDR. So he wouldn't be the first politician to promise everything and then do what he wants. And so I could imagine a new and improved form of Trump showing up where he says, look, I have 4 years to do something for this country. I believe Trump is a patriot. I believe that he wants the country to be good. I think he's a narcissist. I don't doubt that. But everyone in positions of power have some narcissism.
As long as the outcomes are fine, then who cares what's deep inside of his heart?
That's right. I think he wants to win for his sake, but he also realizes that if he's going to be great, he has to do something. And so, and I don't believe Harris has a whiff of that. I don't think she has any sense of moral compass. I don't think Biden, I think, was immoral. Right? I think Biden has been crooked his entire career. but not to the point where it just. If Biden had been elected, 3 or 4 cycles ago, it would have been fairly standard looking to me. The fact they elected a guy who was demented, I went back and looked at my tweets from 2019. And I was talking about how he's had multiple strokes or something. To say that we didn't know he was demented is insanity in itself. And so we somehow installed a president. Notice I say we didn't elect. Who we knew was demented. That's a failed system. That system is broken down too much. It kind of broke when the VP was Sarah Palin. She was not qualified to be a VP candidate for McCain, and somehow he got goaded into taking her. And she was just sort of Buttigieg, but Buttigieg is more impressive than Palin to me. Not in terms of political views, but I think he's more presentable. Palin had this sort of real hickish quality about her. J.D. Vance, I don't completely trust because his origin story is too good. He goes from Yale to Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt right away. There's something wrong with that. And then, he basically woke up on third base very quickly.
He feels like
as did Obama. He got spotted at Yale. Said, "Oh, this guy's got a great origin story. Let's get him to the White House." I have an acquaintance who I think is going to do the same thing. Now he seems to be in kind of a limbo. God, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's a former mayor of Ithaca, and he was friends with my son. God, why am I drawing a blank on his name? I met up with him. I had lunch with him. In any event, he's black. He was on welfare as a kid. He's articulate. He's funny. He's endearing. And so he would be a great, and he was on Meet the Press. And they said, "What's the most pressing problem in Ithaca?" Right. And he sits there and he looks them right in the eye and he says, "Potholes." Right. He's very good. And right now he's running some not-for-profit something or other, which sounds kind of like the Obama route in, right? Where they put him in a holding tank and build up a resume, maybe. I think he's going to be in the national press. What a former mayor of Ithaca. God damn it. This is too insane. I mean, I used to have emails with him and stuff.
So what's the significance of this guy?
He's got a great origin story, and I think they're going to groom him for big time politics. He's very good. He's very affable.
Is he what party does he belong to?
He's a Democrat, Savante American. I'm followed by his mother on Twitter. Okay, so my son knew him. There's a dark story in the closet that I'm going to keep to myself. I offered up to a lawyer. There's a kid who did 5 years in prison for a sexual assault that he didn't commit. And my son and I stepped forward to try to head it off at the pass. We talked to the lawyers and we got deposed and things like that. I think the woman fabricated the story. He and the woman had something going. So the assistant DA is prosecuting the mayor's bimbo. That's as far as I'm going to go. And I'm not sure anything happened there, but I told the lawyers because I said, yeah, if you have to use it to get this kid off, because this woman is a sociopath. And he did 5 years in prison. And I talked to him while I was in prison. I had lunch with him after he got out. I mean, and I really tried to help the family without knowing what to do. But I've always felt, if you find yourself saying somebody should do something, that means you. I learned that years ago. Somehow I said, if you say someone should, that's my own creation of a defense against the bystander effect, which I did not know what it was at the time, but somehow it clicked with me. If you find yourself saying someone should do something, that should be you. You see some woman getting attacked on the street and you say someone should do something, you got to go over, right? I remember seeing an article about a guy who looked in a van and there was a girl tied up in the back. And then the guy driving the van came up and the guy didn't stop him. And they asked him, well, why not? And he said, well, he's really mean looking. I'm going, I don't care, dude. you might die trying to save the girl, but that's when
Did he
you
get like his
call the,
license plate number or like call the
no,
cops or anything?
no, boom,
Like,
off went the van, right? And so when this assault charge came through, and I knew that we had data to support the kid who got accused. My son did, because the woman had used the legal system against him demonstrably wrongly. And so nothing came of it, but she showed a history of using the legal system. And my son kind of didn't want to step forward. I said, Thomas, I'm going to save you a lot of pain and suffering. Years from now, you'll be laying in bed saying, I should have done something. I'm going to help you do something now. So we both testified first at Cornell, actually, when they first investigated it. And I said, I just signed a top secret, I won't talk about it, secrecy agreement, which fucked them because they released it after I signed the agreement. But I said at some level, I hope it's true. I hope she did get assaulted, because at least I could live with that. Because right now the kid's being crucified. And then when I saw the official record, the woman who was one of the women who was taking notes said gender bias. Fuck you. That wasn't gender bias. I was just. By the way, have you heard anything from Daniel Penny's trial?
no, I haven't.
Speaking of travesties, he was supposed to come to trial in October, and October's rolling along.
What is this case specifically for those who may not know?
This is the guy who choked the guy in the subway who said he was going to kill everyone, and he choked him for 90 seconds, and the guy died. It wasn't 15 minutes like the press said. It was 90 seconds. And he choked the guy, and the guy died. But he and all sorts of people were dialing 911 and stuff, right? New Yorkers don't dial 911 easily, right? They shake a lot off. And all the people there said, hey, he saved our lives, right? And then they charged him with homicide. And it was Bragg, I think. It was the same douchebag who's been charging Trump, and so it's like, hang that bastard, right? I have the weaponization of the justice system is the most treasonous thing I've ever seen in my life, bar none, period. I would rather have some guy slip shit to the Russians than weaponize the justice. So Merrick Garland should be brought in front of a grand jury and thrown in jail if convicted by a jury of his peers. I think he's treasonous. Merrick Garland is a wretched individual of a higher order. I'd take, if I were to make a list of people I'd like to see put in front of a grand jury, it'd be Fauci, a couple of the others, Walensky, guys like that, Dazak Barrick, the biocrime guys. And I'd put Merrick Garland in there. I would put the Bidens in there. There's some people, and you say, well, what about Trump? It's like, you scrutinized the shit out of the guy and you found nothing.
Do you think that'll ever happen, though? Do you think they'll ever be held accountable?
No chance. No. This is the system we live in. This is the system. That's why I've been chasing the pedophile story, because I think pedophile is the underlying driving force. I think these guys are all compromised by young boys, and I think it's grotesquely pervasive. And I just for people who think I'm nuts, the other day I heard a testimony that rattled my cage in a profound level. So you say, well, if a guy's in Congress but he's an honest guy, he's not going to get trapped by this shit. He's not going to get on Epstein's jet. He's not going to, he's not going to go with P. Diddy. And the guy's name was Janda. And he did an interview, and I saw it on Twitter a couple weeks ago. And he said he got appointed to the Bush administration. I think it was Bush Jr. I got to look up the details, which means it was a Cheney VP. And this grizzled veteran sits him down right away and says, look, you're now in the big leagues. He said, don't ever go to a private party. This is Janda telling the story, the undersecretary of who knows what, but somewhere in the Bush administration. And he says, what the guy said is, even if it's the vice president's house, do not go to a private party. And he said, you will wake up in the morning, you won't remember what happened, you'll have a hangover, and you'll have a Polaroid on your chest with you.
How do you think people like Ron Paul or Thomas Massey or like these exceptions? How do they squeak through without getting
Well, they
blackmailed
didn't
or
get a
controlled?
Mickey for start. I until further notice, I think Massey's a superstar. I just got followed by Massey. What a
Really?
great moment. Yeah, it's probably some
Congrats.
intern. Well, it's probably some intern, right? Um, you know how it's Twitter. We're like teenagers in the sense, how some teenagers say, "Oh, I've got 27 Facebook followers." Once in a while, you get a follower that just like takes the wind away from you, and you go, "Oh boy." And some really interesting ones. And you say, "Well, why does it matter?" Well, it matters because it opens up communication channels. So if I want to know something about deep state, I'll reach out to some guy like Mike Benz in a DM and say, "Mike, can you tell me this?" Right? It's really useful because Mike Benz or Tony Schaffer, who's a military intelligence guy, or Lee Slusher, and these are great guys to be able to chat with. And I don't think I'll chat with Thomas Massey. That's not an open channel. But that's the miracle of Twitter. So I'm connected. Like this year, I connected with Cheryl Atkinson and had some brief chats about one of her shows she did. And so, what an opportunity that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right.
Right. And
not only it's not only a communication platform, but then you're also influencing the influencers.
That's right.
You're having a direct effect on what's being put out there on a wider scale, even though you're a secondary effect.
So I had a problem where I had a couple of phone calls with a guy who was professed to be a deep state cyber intelligence expert, and he was a genius, no question. And I can find him on the internet. I can find evidence of him on the internet. I can find lawsuits, which his computing company sued some guy for something, uneventful. So I can find him as a real person on the internet. He's unquestionably a genius. What I couldn't convince myself was whether he was really super deep state. When I say super deep state, I mean the things he could rattle off names, dates, and stuff with an unbelievable skill. The data, blah, 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 blah. He just went on and on and on, and he was not hesitant. This was in a signal call. And we have a mutual friend who I trust, but I'm not sure I trust him not to be duped by the guy. But and so he either is super deep and was involved in historically important events, or he's a grandiose narcissist, and that it's all a fabrication in his head, and he's created this complete fictional world. And I spent several Zoom calls listening to him, trying to figure out which one it is. So I was on a third call with him, and he's Jewish. He clearly has very strong Israeli ties. And we were having a casual discussion. And as I said to you, I stay out of the Israel-Gaza debate. I'm happy to mention it. I'm happy to talk about how it could destroy world peace and stuff like that. But what I won't do is side with the Palestinians or the Israelis, because I don't understand what the hell's going on there. No one understands the Middle East, so how could I? But I heard him one too many times refer to someone who said something against Israel being anti-Semitic. And I finally said, with the most delicate of delivery, I said, not everyone who has having trouble with what they're seeing over there is anti-Semitic. And he started to push back hard on me. And I said, well, take, for example, the U.S. government. I don't agree with anything Biden does. I'm an American. He's the head of America. But you can't equate U.S. citizens with our leadership. We have to be able to criticize governments. And therefore, and he pushed back hard on me again. I said, well, take, for example, Joe Sixpack, who's sitting in front of MSNBC, and that's the only feed they get. And he starts talking about what a bunch of ignorant. And when I pushed back against Biden, he actually said, well, he's not a legitimate president. I said, well, maybe so, but he is our president. He kept saying, no, he's not. I go, look, you can't just dismiss him as not our president, even though you don't think he's legit. Right now, he is our president. I don't care how he got there, right? But I'm totally keeping my shit together because I can feel the tension. So I'm delivering it with this, sort of real soft devil's advocation. I said, so Joe Sixpack's listening to MSNBC. You can't blame him for drawing conclusions because he's getting a feed that might be just full of crap. But that's all he's got. And he starts going, he's just an ignoramus. I go, yes, but it's not his fault. He's just trying to put food on the table, so I'm really going this route. And then he starts calling me an asshole, and I end up hanging up on the guy, which I don't do easily. I can tolerate a lot. And at one point I'd reached out back to Twitter. I'd reached out to some guys and said, here's his name. And I believed it to be his real name. And I reached out to the founder of Firefox and Brave, pre-Netscape IPO, Brendan Eich. I reached out to Steve Sinofsky, who you might not know because he was only there briefly, but he was number 2 in command at Microsoft below Ballmer.
Really?
I reached out to a Canadian military intelligence guy who this guy seemed to have an opinion of.
Interesting.
And I asked him if he knew him. And I got every one of them deep sixed it as, this guy sounds psychotic to me. Not. And that's the power of Twitter. Again, other funny stories like Sinofsky, when I was having trouble with Microsoft Outlook. And here he is on Twitter helping me. I'm going, I got the president of Microsoft troubleshooting Outlook on Twitter. And then one day I asked for a spam blocker for Firefox, and Brendan jumps in and says, well, you should use this one because you could download any piece of crap from the internet.
You think that was actually him or like an intern?
Oh, that's unequivocally it's him. Yes, I've had conversations with him. Okay. We exchanged lots of DMs. It's unequivocally him. And he says, well, this is the one you want to use then. He says, but what you ought to try is Brave. And at the time I didn't know that he wrote Brave too. And I marvel at this miracle of the digital world. Now, it's democracy's greatest hope and worst enemy. My fear is we're losing. Now, the big boost came from a deep stater that no one saw coming, and that's the richest guy in the world who's on the spectrum. That's Elon. Now, I have friends who lost possibly hundreds of millions, if not billions, trying to short Tesla. They're never going to give Elon a break. But Elon has done more for free speech than any man in the world. At one point they said, rhetorically, what's the cost of free speech? And Elon said, 44 billion. I thought that's exactly right. And he
could it be a honeypot though? Could Twitter be a honeypot?
Twitter could be anything.
Yeah, because here's the thing with censorship.
It feels better. It feels better now than it did.
For sure. Yeah, I'm not arguing that. For sure, it's 100% better. But before Twitter, you had massive censorship. And really, with the advent of Twitter, with the advent of, X and Elon buying Twitter, it's actually had this after effect, this halo effect where it's actually liberalized.
Now we're speaking up.
YouTube is actually more liberalized now than it was before. You can talk about COVID. You can talk about more topics now that you could.
So Elon handed me a shovel to dig my grave, is what you're saying.
It could be. I mean, he is a military contractor after. I mean, that's not damning in and of itself.
Every company is military.
Yeah.
But what's also true with Elon is he's kind of nuts. And so he could be deep state military, but still say to Bob Iger, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that is Twitter or X, is it an operation just for people to identify themselves for who they are? Because under a censorship regime, you don't know. It's all hidden because people are self-censoring themselves, their true intentions.
Right. I think it could be. The other thing is he certainly is using Twitter to mine, for AI. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no question that Twitter, he didn't just buy Twitter to chat. Now, if I owned Tesla, I'd be nervous because it's pretty clear that Elon's spending a lot more time on Twitter than in Tesla. But here's a guy Did you ever read his biography?
No,
It's
you know,
riveting.
no.
It's riveting. Even if it's a soft sell, you know, even if it's the most favorable view of Elon, it's riveting. It's written by McCullough, I think. He
Mhm.
knows how to tell a story. McCullough's a brilliant biographer. So he wrote Jobs. He wrote
Okay.
he wrote a bunch of books that are just phenomenally good biographies. I think he might have written Da Vinci, which was riveting. Um, and and his description of Elon is so entertaining. And he talks what Elon's brilliance seems to be how to get cut through the bullshit to get to the answer, to
Mm.
the point where, you know, my scientific career was pretty rebellious compared to what you would have predicted for most people. So I got a genetics major. Well, I left high school with mediocre grades, went to Cornell, and you go, how's that possible? My grandfather was president of the National Alumni Association and vice chancellor of the Board of Regents and on the Cornell Council. So that answers that question. That would be harder now, but back then a phone call was made and I got in. I earned my keep when I got here, but I graduated working every waking hour to get a 3.4 because I wasn't a good student. And then I went off to Columbia, having majored in genetics, and got a PhD in organic chemistry. And then I left the field that I was trained in as an assistant professor and went into a different field of organic chemistry. And every step of the way was reckless at some level. And but I think if I had read Elon's biography, it would have fostered that even more. Because I can remember instances where I would say to the group, how do we do this more efficiently? And we would talk about what's the bottleneck. I can remember one case in particular, and I accepted it as, okay, that's the bottleneck. That's why it's slower. And Elon would have said, well, then fuck, do this. So he had a situation like he stopped using aeronautical supply houses for stuff because they were charging, $1.5 million for something that he could go down to Lowe's and buy 2 air conditioners and rip them apart and piece together something that does exactly the same thing. And so it's a phenomenal narrative of a guy who just knows how to get the job done. And he in some sense he was like Jobs, but in some ways he was more impressive than Jobs. And the stories are funnier. So he wanted a scooter. And he stands there and he says to his dad one night, I want a scooter. And his dad says, no, I'm not buying you a scooter. And Elon just stands there and stares at his dad. Just stares at him. Just stink eyes him. The next night he does it again. And finally he says, fuck it. Here's your fucking scooter. And buys it for him. And then he wants to go to some computer meeting. His dad won't do it. So Elon finds the money himself. He goes to the meeting and his dad goes to pick him up. And there's Elon, like 12 years old, talking to these computer scientists. And his dad walks up to get Elon to take him home. And the computer scientist turned to him and says, you've got to get him a better computer. And so he had this way. He could have suffered gambler's ruin by making big bold bets that the house would eventually win, right? That's gambler's ruin, where the deeper the pockets wins. And he hasn't. And when it looked like Tesla was going to go belly up, he did a pump and dump on Dogecoin. That's not in the book, but that's what I saw him do a pump and dump on Dogecoin. And that's what pissed off the short sellers like there was no tomorrow. But he won. It worked. And he recognized that there's nothing to stop doing a pump and dump on Dogecoin. There's no regulations or anything. And so I highly recommend his biography. It was so entertaining.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sure to check that out. If you guys want to see his biography, I will have the link to that down below. It's a book, right?
It's a book.
Yeah. I'll find it on Amazon. I'll link it down below in the description box for people who are interested. All right, Dave. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Anything else you want to talk about before we sign off?
Well, without going into it, I did a deep dive this year on World War II.
Sure.
And
Oh,
and
well,
the
here's the
problem
thing.
with World War II is the idea of a deep dive is insane because historians have spent, lifetimes of deep diving. So for me, the deep dive was to go from social studies level understanding to 6 books later understanding. And what I will tell you is that the narrative that I took from social studies appears to in no way, shape, or form reflect reality.
Mm.
And I'm stunned by things that everyone didn't, and I'm stunned by things that people didn't know. And one of my conclusions is that FDR was a super douchebag.
People like in the finance space, they tend to silo themselves away from the geopolitics and the politics, and it's like you can't do that nowadays because all this stuff is interconnected. Like with these markets, like these markets are
Mm-hmm.
they react to the politics essentially.
And to the extent that we're far from equilibrium, which is my 40-year bear market story, all it would take is a spark to get that whole thing rolling. And all we need is, like you said, the 10-year rates are going up instead of down.
Why is it that why is it that gold is going up but oil's not? It's actually going down. What's the dichotomy there, do you think?
The oil market and the gold market are very different. So the gold market is a fairly fixed market. It's a lot more like Bitcoin, where there's a finite amount. And if you need more gold than the world has, you got to go mine it, and it's hard, right? You don't just open up a new mine. Where oil, they can turn spigots on and off. You can blow up shit in some strait of whatever, and all of a sudden you cause changes in the gold market. So, and the gold market, the oil market is, in the oil market, the gold market is also much more sensitive to economic movements. Whether it's which one's cause, which one's effect is unclear. That's where I listen to guys like Doomberg. Doomberg's an optimist right now because he says, the oil market's not saying we're going to hit a recession soon. I think we're in it. So I hate to go against Doomberg because I know him. I know who he is. I've chatted with him, and he's smarter than me.
But it could be being offset by World War III risks.
World War III is a problem if it shows up, yeah. It goes beyond risk. And the fact that we have leaders who don't seem to be afraid of it is the problem. The fact we've had leaders say we should do a preemptive strike on Russia. No one. The fact we have leaders who say we should do regime change in Russia.
Well,
right? Reagan never said that.
They consume their own propaganda. They think they're only feeding us, the plebs, their propaganda, but then they end up believing it themselves. It's like one big human centipede.
Hillary lost.
Like they're just consuming their own refuse, one after the other.
Hillary thought she was leading because they were rigging the polls, and then she was watching the polls, and so. But also, our leaders are stupid now. I think. When you start putting in AOC and Kamala, this is not Tip O'Neill.
It's idiocracy.
This is idiocracy. Yeah.
Yeah. Say what you will about the old leaders, like the Nixons, savvy. Yeah, the Kissingers, all these guys, like they were evil and everything, but at least they were competent.
Very, very competent, and now we've overdone the putting in a front person, a puppet. We've overdone the puppet thing. And imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis without Kennedy sitting in the room.
Imagine with Kamala.
Well, so I'm partway through Annie Jacobs' book, Nuclear War, and it's terrifying because she goes through this scenario of what happens if North Korea launches an ICBM, right? And she goes second by second. The first second they pick it up, they see the flash. And she goes second by second, then you're up to minute 3. And then now at this point, president gets the call saying we've got a problem, and they rush him into some bunker, and she goes, and you got about 30-minute window, and I'm only partway through it. And you're struck by the importance of having some guy or some person at the helm who can make the decision because they know that this will be a historical, monumental decision, and they are making it. Biden could not have. Trump could, but most people would be afraid of the one he would make. Obama could. I have no doubt that Obama could sit there and apply himself. I'd worry about Hillary if she had been in there, just because she seems a little too psychopathic to me. I'd trust Jimmy Carter. I trust Gerald Ford, the Bushes. But Kamala and Biden both leave me with a sense that if they face that do or die, the buck stops at you. What do we do right now? You have 6 minutes to make the call. I just, those two strike me as completely incapable.
I don't think they'd be presented the decision. I mean, the people around them would have to be smart enough to know that they're not the best fit to make that choice to begin with. It's
kind of structured where it ends up with them.
Yeah, but if I'm in the inner circle and we have 6 minutes to make a choice that could lead to the end of America or the end of the world, look, I mean, I'm going to defy orders and make the right decision, because if we make the wrong choice, then there is no world to go back to.
Well, so we have some rule. I can't remember what Annie calls it, but it's basically if it appears to be we're going to get hit with nukes, we're supposed to fire nukes back, which strikes me as an insane policy. And people have talked about it. Apparently, this has been hotly debated, saying this is an insane policy. Now, the reason you have it in place is because you need the people who could fire the nuke to think, okay, we might hit them and destroy them, but we are going to end up destroyed too. You need them to believe that. So it's possible we don't really have that rule, but we have done everything we can to convey we have that rule.
And Russia has that dead man's hand rule. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I think so.
Which is basically like if the US or anyone does like a decapitation strike on the leadership of Russia, the Russian government, then there's some sort of automated system in place to automatically launch the nukes towards everywhere. Essentially, the entire world would go ablaze.
Right. And so that's Dr. Strangelove, right? That is Dr. Strangelove. That's the doomsday machine. But at the same time, it's possible that they don't really have that, and that is the propaganda that's out there to say you will all die if you do this, so don't even think about it.
All right, guys. Well, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to give us a like and subscribe. Also, Dave, where can people find you?
At David B. Collum on Twitter.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Dave, and thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.